Then we go to outside, and the fire is already, the flames are already quite scary indeed. And Pete goes in there. Why? Why? According to what he says there, because she's still my wife.
One take, one take, one take, one take.
Greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I very much hope that this video finds you well and in very good spirits wherever you are in the world. And today, let us continue on with our discussions of this great series known as Twin Peaks. And we've been discussing the episodes so far with this video discussion format. And today, I'd like to focus on episode 7 of season 1 of Twin Peaks. So just to repeat how we've been doing this video discussion series so far. So today, let's focus on this episode, including all events leading up to and including this episode. I won't be touching upon anything beyond this episode in detail. So everything up to this really fantastic episode, written and directed by Mark Frost. Also, I don't hold myself out to be in any way a Twin Peaks expert, so I'm going to get a lot of the details wrong, and I know I've gotten a number of the details wrong already, but I am watching this, or I have watched this series a lot of times, and I'm a big fan of this series, including this episode. So, with those caveats and those parameters set, now let us begin the discussion in earnest. And wow, what an episode! Everything is happening all at once. A continuation of the previous episode, obviously. And so from that, if you remember from the previous episode, Dr. Jacoby has been lured out. That allows Donna and James to investigate and break into Dr. Jacoby's quarters. And so they're trying to find the tape, the missing tape, which is apparently the recording that Laura made to Dr. Jacoby, the What's Up Doc recordings. And they understand that this missing tape probably corresponds to the tape that she made on the day that she died. So they hold a particular amount of significance to this. So they first have to find it. They think it's in Dr. Jacoby's quarters. They try to search many places, Donna and James do. They find the box of cocktail umbrellas. And so we have this idea of Dr. Jacoby seemingly attaching significance to the cocktail umbrella with various memories or events in his life, which I think is a very charming aspect of Dr. Jacoby. I think James makes the comment how this is weird, but it's a very interesting thing how in the world of Twin Peaks, you have some characters look at some aspects in one way, but then other characters, or viewers in this case, might look at it in a completely different way. I recall the incident involving Laura's funeral and Leland Palmer falling on the coffin and going up and down, up and down. People saw it as being this really tragic, almost absurd thing, whereas a little bit later we see Shelley Johnson laughing about it at the diner with some of the diner customers. So here we have differing perspectives on the same event. Here, my perspective might be a little bit different than, say, James and Donna's, because I think that the box of umbrellas is quite charming, and it's very much a window into the type of soul that Dr. Jacoby is or seems to be. But they also find the coconut, because remember, the coconut was something that was mentioned in one of the earlier recordings. And so now this is something that I think Donna latches onto. And lo and behold, what do they find in this coconut, which we had seen, we as viewers saw in a previous episode, of course. But this is, I think, the first time that Donna and James are seeing it and discovering it and opening up to find the tape and also this the half-heart locket, which has been part of the paraphernalia of the Twin Peaks legend all the way throughout this season. We've seen it here and there, and it played a large part, for example, in the crime scene, as we know. So we have these secrets, or the potential of secrets, hidden away in the coconut, which Donna and James find. Meanwhile, of course, then they go away on the bike, and we also remember from the previous episode that Bobby put something in the bike, and we find out later what that is. in order to set up James. In fact, he does set James up because we understand later in the episode that Cooper and Sheriff Truman, Sheriff Truman finds this after being kind of alerted to it by quote unquote Leo, which is really Bobby, calling the police station with a tip off. The tip off that leads to James being arrested or questioned further, and that's how his story ends as far as this episode is concerned. But going back to the earlier part, so as Donna and James are leaving, we also understand that Maddie is alone by the gazebo, and who do we see in the background? We see Dr. Jacoby in the woods approaching, and there's this kind of almost sense of maybe disbelief or almost a desperation, if you will, in his look. But he's not the only one there, because he is suddenly attacked by a masked figure. And this attacker violently attacks from behind and then assaults him. So he falls to the ground, Dr. Jacoby does, in a very violent manner, while we see in the distance Maddie going off with James and Don. So they don't notice that Dr. Jacoby's there, and they, of course, then don't notice that he is now being attacked and seemingly left for dead. Who knows? Because we see him turn over, and we go into the zoom in to his eye, indeed the white of his eye. And I think this is a very significant image, because we focus in on the white of his eye. It then fades into the casino, the roulette, wheel, which is linked to One-Eyed Jacks. But also keep in mind too, this concept or this image of the white of one's eyes comes up a lot. It might come up sometime later, who knows? Let's think about that, the whites of the eyes. And also, when we're talking about, say, David Lynch works, I know this is an episode written and directed by Mark Frost, but the Twin Peaks is also indelibly linked with the world of David Lynch, including other works directed by David Lynch. For those who know the film Blue Velvet, for example, there is a character in Blue Velvet that mentions the whites of the eyes in a very, in kind of a kind of sinister scene in that film. But for those who know Blue Velvet, you probably know the character I'm referring to. But coming back to this, so we have Dr. Jacoby in a very dangerous situation, and we're not sure at this point whether he is alive or dead. We will find out later that he is going to go to the hospital, of course, but as will other people too. So the hospital becomes one of the key places of this world Twin Peaks, because we understand later that Dr. Jacoby suffered a heart attack, and so he is now in the hospital. But as I say, he's not the only one. Now let's return to another character. Well, I mentioned One-Eyed Jacks, and so we have a number of people too who are in One-Eyed Jacks. So for example, if you recall, Big Ed and Cary Grant, Dale Cooper, and also we have Jacques Renault. And Jacques Renault and Dale Cooper are now talking, and Dale Cooper is giving him the story about how Dale Cooper is the quote-unquote money man behind Leo. And so this is to try to get more information from Jacques Renault. And there's that very kind of creepy discussion that is had between the two of them at the table there, where Cooper asks Jacques Renault about what happened on the night that Laura died. And Jacques Renault then reveals this idea about, or this thing about, how there was a fight that seemed to have broken out between him and Leo for some reason he doesn't quite know. Well, actually, no, I'm sorry. Let me take that back. That comes a little bit later, does it not? When Jacques Renault is being interrogated in the hospital. At this stage, he talks a little bit about the chip, right? Because the chip, or I should say the chipped chip, which is the One-Eyed Jacks chip, which has a little bit of the piece that it's chipped off, and we understand that this was the fragment, which, in terms of what was found in Laura Palmer's body. And so this gives Cooper the occasion to try to ask what happened and what this chip's significance is. And this is the story that Jacques Renault tells about what Leo Johnson did with the chip and Laura, and putting it in her mouth and saying the line, bite the bullet, baby, and it's shot, this scene is shot in a very creepy way with a close-up on the mouth and the lips of Jacques Renault. Very, very creepy stuff indeed. You can actually read in Cooper's face of, uh, a type of disgust that he seems to be feeling towards this person that he's talking to. And then, of course, this leads to the trap, right? Which is that he's luring the fish with the bait. There's a lot of fish imagery too in terms of the code between and among the enforcement officers, bringing him to the processing plant. Excuse me, a little bit later, and then we have the kind of stakeout, and then finally Jacques Renault is confronted and arrested, or he tries to get arrested, or he tries to be confronted, but he breaks free for a moment, does he not, and is about to pull the gun, right? He's about to fire the gun that he pulls. But lo and behold, who stops him in the nick of time? None other than Andy, right? Wow, what a shot this is, indeed. This is a type of a resolution to a type of character arc that we saw established earlier with the past episodes, right? With Andy dropping the gun, if you remember, in the motel just before they're entering the room where they understand that the Mr. Gerard might be, which is also the room nearby to where Catherine and Ben are at the same time. So if you recall, Andy dropped his gun, and you had Cooper doing that wonderful twirl in surprise, and then later, of course, they go to the firing range, and now this story comes full circle. Now Andy has pulled out his gun and used it in a very effective manner for purposes not just of law enforcement, but also a type of a use of force in order to protect those around him, and he does so. And he doesn't. It's not lethal force here. It is a wound, but it's not a lethal wound that is inflicted on Jacques Renault, because Jacques Renault is then admitted to the hospital. So this is a really kind of heroic moment, I think, for Andy. It reminds me too of a scene. If those of you who know the film Die Hard, starring Bruce Willis, there is a very famous scene that is that is not unlike what we've seen now with Andy in this particular moment. Yes. Ah ha ha, ah ha ha ha. That is my Bruce Willis impersonation from this particular moment in Die Hard. So again, my apologies again, because I have a whole menu of terrible impersonations. So that's my terrible Bruce Willis impersonation from Die Hard. But now, coming back to Twin Peaks, Andy is now treated as a type of hero. And a little bit later, we get that whole hero's welcome, and the people standing around him telling everyone else about what Andy did, and who is also present but Lucy. And so this gives the opportunity for Andy to go to Lucy in the privacy of the kitchen, which is blocked off by the folding screen there. Right, Andy and Punky. And so here they share a kiss, and this is we understand their rapprochement, or their reunion, or kind of a getting back together after being apart for some reason not quite known, but maybe we get a sense of why Lucy was feeling the way she does. Perhaps, probably, possibly, maybe, who knows. I'm not quite sure exactly why she was hostile towards Andy, but now she is very welcoming because they share an embrace and a kiss. But then what does Lucy say after this? Immediately after, she says, "I'm pregnant." And Andy reacts in a very, without saying anything, he leaves. And this seems to upset Lucy as well. And so this is where Lucy is very upset. She goes to the phone, and then this is where Bobby calls, Bobby pretending to be Leo, or trying to implicate James with regard to the incriminating evidence that he planted in the bike gas tank. So all this is coming full circle, like a donut, is it not? So much things are happening here. Now, going back to what happened to Jacques Renault, because as I said, the hospital is also one of the key locations of this episode. We remember that this is Dr. Jacoby, and also we'll find out, well, the hospital has played an earlier role earlier in the season with Ronette as well. But now we have Jacques Renault, and Jacques Renault is now further being questioned here, and he talks here at this stage about the whiskey or the bottle that was smashed on his head because of a fight that occurred between him and Leo for a reason that Jacques Renault doesn't know why. At least that's what he says here. And then the bleeding that was caused. That's why he used the shirt, Leo Johnson's shirt, which is the bloodied shirt that was found as being one of the pieces of evidence that was planted. That what was it? Dale Cooper had correctly recognized that this was the blood of Jacques Renault, right? AB negative, if I recall correctly. Which actually might come a little bit later when we go into a discussion of episodes that will immediately follow this particular episode. But anyway, so that is the explanation about the bloodied shirt. And then when he came to, he realized that they were gone. Leo and the two girls, Ronette and Laura, they were gone. They didn't know where he went, so he kind of got stranded. At least that's the idea. And then he's asked about the train car, and he says he doesn't know anything about the train car. And a little bit later, Dale seems to believe him, right? And so that means that the implication or the possibility is that Leo, had he perpetrated the crime, the possibility or one possible answer might be that he brought the two girls by himself to the train car and killed Laura there. But again, we're not quite sure if that's the case or not. This is still an ongoing investigation, which I know will find further answers as we go further into the series. But we'll stop. We're stopping here for episode 7 discussion, of course. But to be continued when we go down the path of Twin Peaks. Leo Johnson, of course, has been shot, right, from before, but now he comes back. And as Shelley is washing her hair and the little bit of the suds will go into her eyes, she's trying to reach for the gun, not the gun, but there's a towel next to the gun. She has put the gun down, but this is Leo's chance to grab her and to show kind of disgust and disappointment and anger. And because he knows that she and Bobby are seeing each other, so he feels betrayed and angry, and he's going to take out his anger against her in this act of revenge. And what is the act of revenge? He's also tasked with burning down the mill, and so his way of doing so, or destroying the mill, is to set off a bomb, which will set off a fire, a timed bomb trigger, which will set off a fire in the mill. And he's going to tie up Shelley and put her there in this right, with the thing around in her mouth. And of course, if you have something like that in her mouth, as Catherine Martell can attest to, you can't tell, you can't make out what it is that she's saying because there's something in her mouth. But so she's tied up there, and the idea is that she will die when the bomb is set off and the fire starts and the mill gets burned down, which is a really scary situation. So Leo Johnson is a very scary figure. And here we have Shelley in a very dangerous position indeed. So what will happen to her? We will find out a little bit later. But as that wheel is going on in motion, then we also have Bobby and Leo, the confrontation between the two. And Bobby tries to get out of it, but then Leo is not having any of it. And we see the axe. Remember, we saw Leo and the axe sometime earlier with an earlier episode when Dale Cooper and Sheriff Truman go out and interrogate him. They see the axe and he's chopping wood. Well, now we see the axe again. And my goodness, Bobby is about to get it in a very violent fashion. But what happens at the very last moment? A gun is fired, and we see Leo is shot through a bullet through the window. And we see then Hank in the distance and leaving. And so, wow. So Hank and Leo, we understand that there's a little bit of antagonism between Hank and Leo from a previous episode, that Hank seems to think that Leo is getting a bit too big-headed in a manner of speaking in terms of the underworld of Twin Peaks, especially now that Hank has returned. Whether or not this is the precise reason why, the assumption being that Hank is the one who shot Leo through the glass, again, maybe we'll have to wait and see what the precise reason is. But in any event, the implication is that Hank has shot Leo, or Leo has been shot and Hank is there. And so this leaves Bobby saved just in the nick of time, and Leo seems to be in a daze, perhaps himself dying. We're not sure yet, but maybe he's in a state of dying or near death as he's watching Invitation to Love, and Chet and Montana. Wow, the parallels within parallels within parallels. It's quite something indeed. It reminds me of a line from the work Frank Herbert work Dune, which is of course the basis for another David Lynch work, which is a really great film, by the way. I can't wait to talk about that one. But it's faint within a faint within a faint within. But anyway, what was I saying? So. Leo and what's going to happen with him. To be determined, to be continued, perhaps. But going on with other aspects of the episode, we also have Audrey at One Eye Jacks, because if you remember, when we're talking about the key locations of episode 7, I mentioned the hospital, and I mentioned the mill. And now we have to mention too One Eye Jacks. And so One Eye Jacks is of course very important because this is where this is where Dale Cooper was talking to Jacques Renault earlier in the episode. Also, this is where Audrey is, and she is dressed up to be one of the girls there, who is part of this, I guess, prostitution ring that's run or managed by Blackie. And so it forms a kind of dangerous and precarious situation again for Audrey, because by the end of the episode, of course, she gets a visitor. And who is that visitor but none other than Ben Horne? And this is another cliffhanger. So it's similar to a kind of cliffhanger that we saw from the previous episode, or one of the previous episodes, which is Audrey in the bed of Cooper's, in Cooper's hotel room, 315. And now this is a kind of similar yet very different type of cliffhanger, and the implications are quite disturbing indeed. And it's reminding me too of how this series Twin Peaks is about relationships, it's about couples, it's also about relationships between parents and children. Major Briggs and Bobby comes to mind, also fathers and daughters. So if you recall, we have the father-daughter relationship between Doc Hayward and Donna, and other Hayward children. And then we also have like Harriet, etc. And then we also have the relationship now between Ben Horne and Audrey, which has its own set of ups and downs. And here is a very, very disturbing situation. We're not quite sure what's going to happen. We'll have to wait and see for the next episode to see what's going to happen. But it's a very disturbing situation, and very dangerous, very scary. And Ben Horne doesn't seem to know, or he doesn't know who the identity of this person is. But in any event, we'll see what happens when we get to the next episode. So that's another father-daughter relationship. And of course, I would be remiss if I didn't mention too another very key father-daughter relationship, that is Leland Palmer and Laura Palmer. And if we recall, I mean, some of these relationships might echo each other. There might be some aspects of similarity and difference, but that is another key relationship that is finding its own sense of representation, is it not? Because Leland Palmer understands that, or he guesses correctly, that the person that has been arrested on suspicion of Laura Palmer's killing is at the hospital, and he puts 2 and 2 together, and he goes to the hospital, sets off the fire alarm, Leland Palmer does, and he finds Jacques Renault. And what does he do to Jacques Renault? He smothers him with the pillow, which is itself a very violent act. It's a violent act of killing. We shall see indeed what happens to Jacques Renault, what the implications are for Leland Palmer, if any, and going forward beyond this episode. But this is also a very key, significant, and quite frightening act that occurs, again, at one of the key locations of this episode, which is the hospital. But, and I mentioned too, another key location is the mill, and also another key location is One Eye Jacks. Speaking of the mill, of course, I mentioned a little bit about Catherine Martell. During this episode, we have the search for the ledger, and she can't seem to find it because she knows that there is a plot being hatched against her, Josie and Ben, with the life insurance policy. And so who does she go to for help? None other than Pete Martell. So Pete is back. Great, the legend that is Jack Nance. And so they once again come together, and there's a little bit of a hint of their initial romance together, how they met, how they became a couple, but then they had a type of falling out, but they were still together. There's a very acrimonious type of relationship, but there seems to be a type of, again, I use the wording, a rapprochement or a peace Or maybe it's a temporary one, who knows? Or maybe it's a fake one. Maybe it's something that Catherine Martell is doing just to use Pete Martell, or Pete, because she knows that she has no other allies left at Twin Peaks at the moment. But whatever the case may be, there is still a moment of tenderness, one can say, between Catherine and Pete. There's a hug between them, and you can see Catherine's face. She's kind of maybe a little bit annoyed, but there's a moment, I would say, even in Catherine's face at this point, where there's a sense, I could say I could read into her face a sense of genuine emotion or connection with Pete. So this is a coming together of these two. And this, it finds itself, I think, another expression of the genuine emotion, at least that Pete has, because when the fire is starting at the mill, and they see Catherine's car there, right? They guess that Catherine is still inside, because remember, Catherine goes to the mill because Hank calls, and mysteriously, we know it's Hank, but she doesn't, right? And he calls and says that what she's looking for is going to be found at the mill, and that lures her to the mill, which is going to be set on fire with the timed explosive. And she sees Shelley there. And so, of course, she can't understand what Shelley says at first, because there's something in her mouth, but she removes it, and all this, who is Shelley? Why is she there? What's going on? And then the fire starts, and then everything is going on to chaos. What's going to happen? We're not quite sure it's going to happen, because then we go to outside, and the fire is already, the flames are already quite scary indeed. And Pete goes in there. Why? Why? According to what he says there, because she's still my wife. And he goes in there in that heroic Pete mode, right? Showing no fear, going to the flames, potentially to his own doom. Who knows? But what a hero Pete is. He is such a hero. What a great character Pete is, and so likable. And also maybe there are some interesting hidden agendas that might be associated with his character, especially when we're considering his relationship that we see between him and Josie, and him and Catherine, and the like. So we'll see what happens to Pete, and maybe and hopefully whether or not he survives this, we shall see as we go forward. But this is how Pete's story ends, at least when we get to the end of this episode. So wow, what a dramatic finish to this. And again, it's another show of that genuine emotion that he seems to have towards Catherine. That genuine emotion. Speaking of genuine emotion, or that connection between characters, Nadine's story here, and her the pills and dressing up and like a picnic, and it's a suicide, right? And so this is also a very disturbing, sad moment. We understand that she has been recently upset with the news from the patent attorney and the drape runner, but also maybe there's some other things going on, we're not sure. But she seems to have made an attempt on her own life, and Big Ed comes home, and he discovers this, and he understands what's happened immediately, and he is so shaken by this, and he's so desperate. He doesn't want her to die. He really doesn't want her. So this is a genuine show of emotion. You know, up to now, one could have interpreted Ed's face or Ed's reactions to Nadine, especially because we know that Ed has these strong feelings and emotions towards Norma, and this is reciprocated. But we're not quite sure how Ed truly feels about Nadine. There is a moment in the earlier episode about when Nadine is eating the bonbons and watching TV, Invitational Love, and Ed comes home, and she talks about the disappointing news from the patent attorney, and he says, you know, don't give up, you'll find another patent attorney. So he's very encouraging. That might have been an indication of his true feelings towards Nadine. It's a very complex situation. I'm not sure if it's, we're not quite sure if it's true love, a passionate love, a kind of sexual attraction. We're not quite sure, but there is a genuine sense of emotion. There's a genuine sense of attachment. And why do we know this? Because in scenes like this, when Ed discovers her, she seems to have, right after she has, we understand, taken this overdose of pills, he is so desperate. He says, you know, don't die, don't leave, right? And so this, and he's embracing her, not wanting her to, not wanting to let go. And so this is such a tender, powerful, and sad and poignant moment. And so Ed has these feelings towards towards Nadine, and it's expressed in this very powerful way. So we have so many things going on, so many things going on at once. And we also have to remember, too, speaking of couples, there is also the situation involving Josie and Andrew Packard, and what happened to Andrew Packard, and maybe something quite mysterious and suspicious might have happened, which caused Andrew Packard's death. Right, according to what Sheriff Truman had said in a previous episode to Dale Cooper, if you recall. And again, please pardon me for my poor Sheriff Truman impersonation, but Andrew Packard died about a year and a half ago, right? We didn't get many of the details, but now from Hank, we understand that there seems to have been an accident or a boat explosion or something. And so maybe this might be suspicious circumstances, and Hank being paid off the way he is by Josie, although he is now trying to, in a sense, blackmail her, right? Perpetual blackmail, it seems. I'm not sure if she's having any of it, but in any event, yes. And I love the bit where Hank is talking and you see in the background the antlers from the wall, and it seems to be the antlers coming out of his head. It's a very fascinating image. But yes, more intrigue in terms of another couple, that being Josie and Andrew. So Andrew Packard. So what's going on here? What happened to him? And what does this mean in terms of what Josie's own motivations and agendas, maybe hidden agendas? Who knows? Maybe she is a victim in all this. Who knows? We're going to have to find out. And it ends with that really scary scene with the sort of blood oath kind of cutting of the fingers, and very quite creepy stuff indeed. And it shows how Hank is like this character that seems to be hovering over every single sub community of Twin Peaks. He seems to have his finger in the proverbial cherry pies, right, of all these communities. And so in sort of he tries to get back into the good graces of right, Norma, and trying to get back with her, and also trying to be a kind of good guy, an aw shucks type of persona, while of course revealing that he's still very much in the underworld, or the underworld presence. So the motivations of Hank, and what is that going to do in terms of his relationship with Norma? What is that going to do in terms of Norma's feelings towards Ed, et cetera, et cetera? We saw a little bit of the breakdown, right, between Norma and Ed in an earlier episode. Will this continue? What's going to go on? We'll have to wait and see. But a lot of things going on here in terms of that. And I suppose we should end with, let's see, I suppose we could end to, well, I guess we should end, right, with the end, because while all this chaos is going on in these key locations, and not quite sure what's going to happen to these characters. We don't know if they're going to live or die. We don't know if they're gonna make it out of these very dangerous cliffhanger situations. There are so many cliffhangers here, and perhaps the cliffhanger to end all cliffhangers, at least in the context of this season of Twin Peaks, is indeed the cliffhanger that ends this season, or this episode, which is of course Dale Cooper returning to his hotel room, 315, going in. He's talking to Diane. He sees the note, and which we understand. Which is, I understand that Audrey left under his door before she embarked to One Night Jack's. And then also he gets a telephone call. He doesn't know who it's from. But then also the door, someone's at the door. So a lot of things happening at once. But then as he puts the phone receiver down, we hear the voice. It's Andy. Not sure why Andy didn't identify himself immediately when Cooper picked up the phone, but oh well. And he's talking about how they found Leo Johnson and stuff. But before Cooper can get wind of this, he goes to the door. And what happens when he opens the door? He looks up and he sees down below, and we get a shot of someone holding a gun. Bang, bang, bang. Wow. Cut to black. To be continued. Wow. Yes. The cliffhanger to end all cliffhangers in terms of that. Although maybe we will see more cliffhangers to come when we get into more of the world of Twin Peaks beyond this episode. So hold on to your hats. You're in for quite a ride indeed. But as for right now, wow indeed. And a lot of parallels indeed. Invitation to Love parallels, this idea of the soap opera dynamics. I mean, this is Mark Frost. Mark Frost is such what he brings to the table here in terms of the of these intertwining character dynamics and character arcs that have a beginning, middle, and ends. and it's all coming together in this great set of soap opera dynamic coincidences that may or may not have furtherances as we get beyond this episode. But in any event, wow, what television entertainment indeed that we are witnessing here. Brilliant, brilliant episode all around, and again, just so much to sink one's teeth into, right? Because we have the situation involving, we get a little bit more about what's going on with Laura, what might have happened regarding Laura. And we get a little bit of that in terms of the reconstruction of this, or partially beginning to reconstruct what's happening. So Leo Johnson and Jacques Renault, Ronette and Laura seem to be this four. This could be the pairings or the people that was referred to by the log. Margaret in an earlier episode, of course, and Screaming, and of course Waldo's testimony as well before Waldo was assassinated. And now we have Jacques Renault and what happened, and the explanation of certain clues that were discovered earlier on with previous episodes. But now with that we get more questions. Who is the attacker on Cooper? What's going to happen to Pete and Catherine? What's going to happen to Shelley? What's going to happen to Leo? What's going to happen to Josie and Hank and Sheriff Truman and Donna and James and Madeline? Not to mention, of course, Leland Palmer. We didn't get a lot of Sarah Palmer here, but of course Sarah Palmer is also being mentioned, right? Doc Hayward. When Doc Hayward sees Leland Palmer at the police station, of course, he shouldn't be here. He should be home taking care of Sarah and that sort of thing. So, and also Doc Hayward. Will Doc Hayward show even more of those brilliant Doc Hayward talents? He seems to be the Renaissance man. He seems to be able to do anything, from veterinary to mortician's work, to autopsies, to delivering children. To understanding when grapes are getting rotten, etc. Incidentally, I forgot to mention in the previous discussion, when he says these grapes are right on the edge, when they're talking about feeding Waldo, I always recall there's a song, what was it, by Aerosmith? It was, what was that, Living on the Edge? I know it's not quite the same wording, but I always like to think that maybe Doc Hayward was listening to Aerosmith. I'm not sure what the timing was. Maybe it was a little bit later, a little bit before. I forget. Maybe I got the timing wrong. But Aerosmith was in the air, right? Right. To borrow a phrase from the Dream, there is always music in the air. Maybe for Doc Hayward, maybe that music is Aerosmith. Who knows? It'll be interesting to know what Doc Hayward's musical tastes might be. Going forward, right? Because as we know, there is always music in the air when it comes to this and other episodes of Twin Peaks. I should mention too, I haven't talked a lot about the great atmosphere and the music and the making of and the cast and the performances. But so far, what we have is this assembly of brilliant performances. All the performances are so well-rounded and each so quirky, so memorable, links to and homages, parallels, couplings, and contradictions and the like, and homages to past films. West Side Story. I didn't even mention West Side Story, but there is a link to West Side Story. There's links to the Flintstones. There's a link to One-Eyed Jacks. There's links to many other films. Double Indemnity. We might see, as I said, westerns. We might see more of those links to a cinematic heritage going forward in future episodes. But wow, what a packed set of themes. Performances abound. Brilliant stuff. I love the way in which you have similarities and differences in character. Each has already forged the character's own, say, sense of identity, sense of self. And I love how you have characters, then they tend to go back and forth in terms of, do we like them, do we not like them, and the like. And I think one of the great examples is this is a character like maybe Catherine Martell, or by Ben Horn, Bobby Briggs, and the like, and maybe even to characters like, say, Leland, or even character like Waldo. Waldo has his own presence as well, so very exciting indeed. And things and details are present but also hidden and not necessarily revealed to us. For instance, the details surrounding the relationship between Andy and Lucy. What's going on there exactly? We're not quite sure what's going on, but we get enough. We don't get everything, but we get enough, and I think that's very important. The same is true for characters like Hawk. The same is true for characters like Sheriff Truman, too, although there is some emerging details about Sheriff Truman's own relationships, his own feelings, and that's the same for Dale Cooper as well. We get a lot, but we don't get a lot at the same time, and wow, that is a great thing. Indeed, too, I think the same can be said for the character of Laura Palmer. Throughout this series so far, we've had Laura Palmer who's been front and center. She is the center of things, and yet she is absent at the same time. We saw a little bit of a flashback, right? In an earlier episode is, why am I so happy, right? And James says, I paraphrase, because your skin is so soft and you smell so good, something like that. No, because I really think you love me. So we get a little bit of that and the locket, but we don't get anything except the shot of her that essentially started this whole series, which is the revelation of her body. She's dead, wrapped in plastic, right? Which starts the whole a cycle of drama and mystery that is the series of Twin Peaks in the pilot. But she's also known for her absence. At the same time, she is the center of everything, it seems. And it seems that everyone has been affected by her in terms of her life and her death. And so we shall see going forward what actually happened to her and what the implications of that are going forward. But as of right now, things that have been affected by her are now being affected by things that have been then affected by other things that have been affected by other things that have been affected by other things. And we see, at least in episode 7 here, the sort of culmination of that in this climactic fashion. We shall see what these climaxes lead to further on down the road, starting with the next episode. But before we get to that, my dear friends, yes, this has been discussion of episode 7 from season 1. So many things. I haven't spoken about everything, of course, but these are just some of the points along the way. And I should mention too the great production value. I mentioned the red curtains. We see a lot of red curtains here. The music, the Angelo Badalamenti music it's now iconic, right? It's that's that mood and peace and calm that also leads quite subtly and quite effectively with the change of chord into something quite dark and sinister. And that's exactly what Twin Peaks is, right? It's something that's calm and peaceful, but then suddenly with a very minor change, it can turn sinister and deadly at any given moment. Wow. There will be more opportunity to celebrate the great music of Twin Peaks and Badalamenti and others. But for right now, yes, wow indeed. We are indeed falling in love with the people and places and things that are represented here. Twin Peaks, falling in love indeed. All right, my dear friends. So this is it for now, but we're going to continue on because the series is going to keep going. We're going to have to find out what happens at the next one. But in the meantime, my dear friends, I hope that you are happy and healthy and well. And please keep on watching a lot of great movies and TV shows, such as Twin Peaks. So I'll see you at the next one, my dear friends, and cheers.